late at night and snored. I heard him when I got up at 5. Then he dressed himself in his oldest uniform and went out. Service, I suppose." "Service! Not a bit of it!" cried Lieutenant Dubert. "Learn, my child, that he went out so early to fight a duel with a civilian." She heard the news without a quiver of her dark eyelashes. It was very obvious that the actions of Lieutenant Feraud were generally above criticism. She only looked up for a moment in mute surprise, and Lieutenant Dubert concluded from this absence of emotion that she must have seen Lieutenant Feraud since the morning. He looked around the room. "Come," he insisted, with confidential familiarity. "He's perhaps somewhere in the house now?" She shook her head. "So much the worse for him," continued Lieutenant Dubert, in a tone of anxious conviction. "But he has been home this morning." This time the pretty maid nodded slightly. "He has," cried Lieutenant Dubert. "And went out again? What for? Couldn't he keep quietly indoors? What a lunatic! My dear child." Lieutenant Dubert's natural kindness of disposition and strong sense of comradeship helped his powers of observation, which generally were not remarkable. He changed his tone to a most insinuating softness, and, gazing at the hussar's breeches hanging over the arm of the girl, he appealed to the interest she took in Lieutenant Feraud's comfort and happiness. He was pressing and persuasive. He used his eyes, which were large and fine, with excellent effect. His anxiety to get hold at once of Lieutenant Feraud, for Lieutenant Feraud's own good, seemed so genuine that at last it overcame the girl's discretion. Unluckily, she had not much to tell. Lieutenant Feraud had returned home shortly before 10, had walked straight into his room, and had thrown himself on his bed to resume his slumbers. She had heard him snore rather louder than before, far into the afternoon. Then he got up, put on his best uniform, and went out. That was all she knew. She raised her candid eyes up to Lieutenant Dubert, who stared at her incredulously. "It's incredible! Gone parading the town in his best uniform! My dear child, don't you know that he ran that civilian through this morning? Clean through as you spit a hair." She accepted this gruesome intelligence without any signs of distress, but she pressed her lips together thoughtfully. "He isn't parading the town," she remarked in a low tone. "Far from it." "The civilian's family is making an awful row," continued Lieutenant Dubert, pursuing his train of thought. "And the general is very angry. It's one of the best families in the town. Feraud ought to have kept close at least." "What will the general do to him?" inquired the girl anxiously. "He won't have his head cut off, to be sure," answered Lieutenant Dubert. "But his conduct is positively indecent. He's making no end of trouble for himself by this sort of bravado." "But he isn't parading the town," the maid murmured again. "Why, yes, now I think of it. I haven't seen him anywhere. What on earth has he done with himself?" "He's gone to pay a call," suggested the maid after a moment of silence. Lieutenant Dubert was surprised. "A call? Do you mean a call on a lady? The cheek of the man! But how do you know this?" Without concealing her woman's scorn for the denseness of the masculine mind, the pretty maid reminded him that Lieutenant Feraud had arrayed himself in his best uniform before going out. He had also put on his newest dolman, she added in a tone as if this conversation was getting on her nerves, and turned away brusquely. Lieutenant Dubert, without questioning the accuracy of the implied deduction, did not see that it advanced him much on his official quest. For his quest after Lieutenant Feraud had an official character. He did not know any of the women this fellow who had run a man through in the morning was likely to call on in the afternoon. The two officers knew each other but slightly. He bit his gloved finger in perplexity. "Call!" he exclaimed. "Call on the devil!" The girl, with her back to him and folding the hussar's breeches on a chair, said with a vexed little laugh, "Oh, no, on Madame de Lyon." Lieutenant Dubert whistled softly. Madame de Lyon, the wife of a high official, had a well-known salon